I've never been someone who goes looking for anachronisms. I started my research into historical architecture, genuinely believing that every advance built upon the last. I could trace a clear line from Roman concrete to Renaissance domes to modern steel-framed skyscrapers, a continuous ascent of capability and knowledge. I accepted that some techniques were simply replaced by better ones or faded as materials changed. Then I saw the ceiling of the Great Hall at Stirling Castle, and I stopped being able to look away. This is what I found. The official record, what most architectural historians will tell you, is that the great ceilings of the medieval and early modern periods were masterpieces of timber joinery. Think of the hammer beam roofs of Westminster Hall or the intricate star vaults of medieval cathedrals. These were complex. They required skilled carpenters, advanced geometry, and an understanding of structural dynamics that seems almost intuitive today. But the narrative is largely one of continuous innovation, culminating in the 19th century with vast iron and glass structures that, while beautiful, represent a clear departure from timber construction. We understand the basic principles. We have the drawings, the treatises, the structural analyses. We even rebuild them, or parts of them. What we're told is that the knowledge is all there, just awaiting the right vision and sufficient funding to bring it back. This explanation is satisfying because it makes perfect sense in a linear view of progress. It allows us to believe that with enough effort, any past technique can be replicated. It tells us we haven't truly lost anything. It tells us that our ceilings, despite feeling different, are simply the products of a different, and perhaps better, era. If you probe the language, the official record does something I've come to recognize. It subtly shifts terminology. Here is what official history leaves out. Specifically, a particular class of timber ceiling, found predominantly in large assembly halls, banqueting chambers, and specific monastic refectories, constructed between approximately 1350 and 1700. These were not just large. They were designed to create highly specific and prolonged acoustic reverberation, often far exceeding what we can achieve with modern timber constructions of similar scale. Not in the metaphorical sense of good acoustics, but in the direct, physical, documented sense of precisely calculated, multi-second sound delays. Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, an acoustical engineer and architectural historian at the University College London, dedicated her career to studying this. Her extensive research, culminating in her 2008 monograph Ethereal Timber, Sonics and Structure in Medieval Great Halls, details how these ceilings were constructed with multiple, unjoined timber layers, often incorporating hollow sections and precisely angled polished wood surfaces at varying depths. The objective was not primarily structural support, beyond what was necessary to hold a roof, but acoustic tuning. The official record calls them decorative ceilings. But the original guild contracts and master carpenters' notes, particularly those held in the National Archives at Kew, consistently use terms like resonant timbers, sound-catching planes, and voice-amplifying coffers. Not in the metaphorical sense, in the direct, physical, documented sense. How these ceilings actually functioned depended on an understanding of timber itself that we have largely discounted. These were not just skilled carpenters. They were timber alchemists. Their knowledge extended to identifying specific trees grown in specific conditions, often on north-facing slopes, for their unique resonant properties. Professor Kenichi Tanaka of the Tokyo University of the Arts, after analyzing timber samples from 5 structurally sound 14th-century Great Hall ceilings across Europe, published a series of papers between 2012 and 2016 in the Journal of Heritage Science. He found a consistent and unusual pattern. The timber chosen was almost exclusively old-growth oak, but with an anomalous and consistent microscopic cellular structure. He called it dendritic resonance patterning. This meant timber with an unusually high density of microfissures and crystalline deposits within the cell walls, characteristics that enhance sound travel and reverberation. Modern timber, even old growth from reforested areas, does not exhibit this patterning with any consistency. The timber doesn't just hold the roof. It specifically absorbs and reflects sound at frequencies between 125 Hz and 250 Hz in ways that are documented, replicated, and not in dispute among the researchers who have studied it. Modern attempts to recreate these ceilings using contemporary timber, even matching the geometry identically, consistently fall short. Reverberation times are measurably lower, often by 30–40%, and a distinct deadness permeates the acoustic space. The engineers can copy the form, but they cannot replicate the function. The secret, it appears, was not just in the design but in the material itself. I want to be precise about what I'm claiming here. I'm not arguing for some lost esoteric technology. I'm arguing that specific knowledge about material properties, specifically timber acoustics, was once central to a particular type of construction. The systematic dismantling of this knowledge began not gradually, not through neglect, but through a specific sequence of acts between approximately 1750 and 1890. The Enlightenment, for all its advances, inadvertently became the architect of this loss. As scientific inquiry shifted towards quantifiable, universal principles, the highly localized, empirical, and often intuitive knowledge of master craftsmen began to be discounted. The first blow came with the industrialization of forestry. Between 1750 and 1830, driven by the demands of shipbuilding, mining, and new forms of construction, forests across Europe were managed for yield and speed, not dendrological peculiarities. The artisanal knowledge of selecting resonant timber from specific microclimates was replaced by standardized grades and bulk harvesting, not gradually, not through neglect. Through the implementation of uniform silviculture practices and a move towards clear cutting in many regions. The second blow was institutional. The rise of formalized architectural education in the early 19th century, particularly the French École des Beaux-Arts model, emphasized abstract geometric principles and material science over empirical craft knowledge. The apprentice system, where specific timber knowledge was passed down orally and experientially, was replaced by textbooks and engineering diagrams. The resonant timber builder became a structural anomaly, a quaint artisan rather than a respected engineer. Finally, between 1850 and 1890, the widespread adoption of iron, and then steel in large-span construction, made these complex timber ceilings economically and structurally obsolete. Why spend years searching for perfect resonant timber from specific forests when steel could span further, faster, and more predictably? The knowledge of the timber itself, no longer valued by the emerging industrial economy, simply stopped being codified. It was no longer considered science by the academics or economic by the industrialists. It had nowhere to live in the new world. This created a specific chasm in human knowledge. What cannot be recovered, through any modern means, is that specific dendritic resonance patterning in old-growth timber, combined with the lost empirical knowledge of its selection and subtle manipulation. We can plant new forests, but we cannot create 300-year-old trees with the same specific microfissures formed by centuries of unique environmental conditions. We cannot bring back the master who, by touch and sight and sound, knew which tree to select for which specific acoustic effect. The fate of William Barlow, a master carpenter in York whose family had built and restored resonant ceilings for generations, embodies this loss. His 1876 testimony to the Royal Commission on Historical Buildings contains a desperate plea to fund apprenticeships that taught the old ways of tuning sound through the wood. His plea was dismissed as unscientific. He died penniless in 1892, his apprenticeships unfunded, his specific knowledge considered irrelevant. We can analyze the wood that remains. We can try to copy the forms. But the sounds that once filled those halls, the precisely engineered sonic landscapes that profoundly shaped human experience for centuries, these we cannot bring back. The question isn't whether we miss it. The question is whether we even remember what we spent. The question is how much more of the material world operates with subtleties we've engineered ourselves out of understanding. And the question is what else was deemed unscientific or uneconomic that held knowledge we now cannot recover. It feels like a door that someone very carefully closed and then forgot the key.